Before we get started, this presentation, I wanted to know that, I wanted you to know, of course you to know, that the slides will be available at the end of the presentation. We need your feedback, and then you'll get back your presentation for free. So you can take pictures for social media, for LinkedIn, but if you need to have some information from the slides, you will receive those at the end of the presentation.
Perfect. So there's been a lot of buzz lately around greener, more eco-conscious solutions in all facets of our life. But let's be honest, when it comes to e-commerce, sometimes it's a little difficult to understand what greener solutions could be. So today we're going to walk you through some simple steps that you can take to help reduce the impact on the environment. So before we really get started, let's start off by revisiting the details of the global climate crisis. So CO2 has increased in our atmosphere by 50% since the pre-industrial era. And that's a warming of 1.1 degrees Celsius. And the ICT industry represents 4% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. While this may seem small, the ICT industry actually contributes more greenhouse gases than the aviation industry. So wait a second, let that set in. The ICT industry contributes more greenhouse gases than the aviation industry. That's crazy. And it's expected to increase up to 15% of greenhouse gases by 2040. So the decisions that we make today are what are going to determine our future. I'm sure most of you have learned or heard about the term net zero. And essentially, it just means that we're trying the concept of cutting greenhouse gas emissions to as close to zero as possible. As of today, only 35% of global GHG emissions are tracked and managed. Businesses will be required to take action as a result of new regulations around the world. So looking at your business today, what choices have you made to make greener choices? Oh, there we go. E-commerce and green are two words that typically we don't hear together. The big question is, how can the e-commerce industry join the mission?
Yes, so we need to understand that there are two sides of the coin. One says that e-commerce is more green because, of course, you don't have these brick-and-mortar stores. The emission caused by a last-mile delivery can be lower because people don't drive to the shops, to the brick-and-mortar stores. They receive a bunch of packages at once, and it should be greener. You don't have employees, you don't have all that overhead. But on the other side, we need to understand that it's like a better of two evils. And the thing is that it's still evil. So we need to do something to change the direction we are going. And by 2040, as Chantal mentioned, the ICT is going to produce 15%, by 2050, 17% of global CO2 emission, which is completely overwhelming for me, and we need to do something to change it. And that's why we are here today. We want to share some low-hanging fruits with you and tell you or suggest how can you cut the unnecessary overhead. And there is no better person than Chantal to share some infrastructure insights.
So the concept of a shared responsibility model, one between a provider and client, is super common in the cybersecurity space. It's similar with green hosting. Both parties have a role to play. Platform.sh focuses on three main ways to help reduce carbon emissions, with the goal of reducing resource use. First is geolocalization. That's a tongue twister. Choosing hosting locations based on carbon intensity. The second being optimization, the ability to create efficiencies with cleaner code. And the third is density and right sizing, essentially fewer servers. Cloud hosting enables you to utilize servers located around the world. Here we have a map of the world, and you can clearly see different regional areas have different carbon intensities. It really comes down to how various regions are creating energy. That means that you can choose to deploy to a greener data center. One's located in a low carbon electricity grid. And by changing the location from a high carbon grid to a low carbon grid, you can reduce CO2 emissions by up to 15 times. Here's an example from the northern US and Canada. Within a few hundred miles, the carbon intensity of these available servers changes dramatically, offering you a greener choice to host your websites and applications. So you can see a vast difference between the carbon intensity in Virginia and Iowa compared to Ontario and Quebec. Platform.sh uses right sizing to provide highly dynamic container-based solutions. So compared to running on a generic cloud virtual machine, we can achieve higher levels of density while still guaranteeing resources for both your production and your development environments. That enables us to reduce the resource use up to 12 times. That's up to 12 times as compared to an AWS EC2 virtual machine. Platform.sh offers both more efficiency and reduced impact on the environment.
I started my career before the times of AWS, Google Cloud Platform, and so on. And I worked at the platform that supported e-commerce stores with aggregating their data and displaying all together, something like Google Merchant these days. But I mentioned the time frame because it's really important to understand why my background is so strongly related to performance. Back in my times, the situation when we needed more resources was related to announcing a public order, getting some offers, choosing the right servers, put them in the rack space, and then connect them to the internet, which usually took 2 weeks up to 2 months. So we had to be really resource aware with every single decision made to the application. In my opinion, cloud computing resulted or introduced a huge regression with understanding of application architecture. It's just on one side the best thing that could happen, but on the other side, because the low threshold to enter, it's the worst thing that could happen to the environment. And the paradigm, you can always add more resources. Is it good for us, for environment? Before we start, we need to understand the numbers. Because first, when you communicate with your own CPU, the same physical processor on the same server, it takes half nanosecond. If you use L2 cache, it takes 7 nanoseconds. But let's compare that to the NVMe drive on the same server, it's important. It takes 16,000 milliseconds compared to 100 nanoseconds that takes to get information from the RAM memory. And compared to the round trip with the same data center located in the same location. So maybe you know already, maybe not, but there's one huge issue with cloud computing. Even if everything is in the same location, in the same data center, you waste time like 1,600 times as much as you could spend on communicating with local Redis. You need to understand that before we move on. Because the architecture is the first low-hanging fruit that can help you save time, which means that it reduces the overhead of your application. Sometimes, or not even sometimes, it's quite common for corporate users that when they move Redis, like cache Redis for configurations, for layouts, and so on, the network interface is no longer overwhelmed with communication to Redis. It communicates with its local instance, saving huge amounts of time, huge amounts of resources. Another example, small stores that are actually split between multiple kinds of services when they don't need it. The architecture needs to save the resources and be adjusted to specific needs of specific client. You cannot just go to, which is the case very often, you cannot go to Experience League on Adobe website, get the diagram of the infrastructure, and apply that to every single merchant. It doesn't work this way because you waste the huge amount of resources. The second thing, which is low-hanging fruit, I want you to get back to your e-commerce tomorrow after the conference and get through the admin panel and list on your paper notebook the features that you don't use. I can guarantee, like that's the most often case for my clients, that after removing features they don't use, we get even 40% of performance increase just by removing the modules they don't need. So it's another case where you waste your money, you waste your performance just to serve something that is not being used. And yeah, and that's it. The third low-hanging fruit I want you to know is actually identifying your bottlenecks. And for me, it's very frustrating. Sometimes I vent on the internet, on Twitter, about some companies. But the great example comes from 2020, because there is a popular extension vendor, especially with corporate integrations. And in 2020, I vented on them on Twitter, saying that, come on guys, what's wrong with you? How it is possible that loading a single admin grid with 200 items on it, it takes 20,000 requests to database. Not one request with 20,000 items, no, 20,000 calls to database. Do you remember the numbers? Same data center, 16 milliseconds, sorry, 1.6 milliseconds. And now multiply that by 20,000. And you have 32 seconds to load the admin grid. Just waiting time, not processing data time. So it's very often that if you identify bottleneck, you can fix it by yourself, if it's custom extension or if it's the issue with the store itself. Or you can contact the vendor of the extension, asking them to fix the performance issue. And here, it's very important to understand that Blackfire is a cool tool that I use to identify bottlenecks. I see something smells, I run Blackfire against that part of the application, and then I get the results. I see, as you can see on the screen, that 43.9 seconds are spent on waiting time, like waiting for data to come back. So you get clear information about what's happening under the hood. What are you waiting for? So now is the question again. Would you add more hardware if it's needed? Or maybe we should take a look at the table and consider that if your application is able to serve 51 customers per second, and you add more servers, it's able to handle 102 clients per second, then client still waits for the response 200th of millisecond. But of course, it's not your credit card, it's merchant's credit card, so double the servers, okay, money is gone, and environment is actually affected. But what if you instead improve the performance. It's one-time investment. You improve the performance to handle 100 customers per second, and then the average time is almost 50% of the previous value. You don't invest more money in more servers, you save the planet. So every single time when you make a new decision about your infrastructure, about your application, you need to consider whether it's better to scale it properly and optimize up, or scale improperly and actually take away this beautiful planet from my children. Okay, how could it be for me to not have something bonus? Because it hurts me deep inside my heart that people consider optimization as a part of, server stuff and some of the application stuff, but they forget about all the agents in front of their desks, in front of their computers, next to their phones, answering the calls from customers, and waiting. I'm not sure if you had to change your reservation with Hard Rock Hotel. It takes like 25 minutes to get your reservation loaded. So if your agents are inefficient, they spend lots of time in front of computers, wasting resources again, because they could serve twice as many clients. So please review the bottlenecks, the most commonly used bottlenecks in your admin store, in your store admin. Identify bottlenecks, identify where your agents waste their time and your money, and just optimize it. Admin panel is still a part of the store. So it's low-hanging fruit, because very often it's just about adding one plugin to reroute the whole request and load all the data necessary for grid in advance. It takes for experienced developer, it's like 4 hours of work, and you save hours, like tens, hundreds of hours of your agents. So now we said previously that we are not going off the stage before we get 3 questions. So the day is long.
Be nice, guys.
We need your questions. Yes, please.
Yeah, some examples of admin optimization from
Yeah, so one of the optimizations of the admin panel I recently noticed was for the Risky Fight platform. They come out of the box with a really nasty policy of loading data, and that literally started to be an issue for the client, that they had to export huge amount of data from the grid, from admin grid, and they reported that, hey, come on, we cannot wait for, they had 1,600 orders per day, my client. And they said, oh, come on, we cannot wait 2-3 minutes for every 100 of orders to export. We need to find it, we need to get it faster. And then we found out that, okay, Risky Fight is the issue. And just a single plugin, of course, this one was not 4 hours. It took 8 hours with the whole investigation. But we cut this time to less than 5 seconds. And there's still huge field for optimization, but we wanted low-hanging fruits in those 6 hours. Okay, 2 more. I told you, the day is long. I know there is Jakub from Poland. He definitely has some question. Oh, so on the front end, that's a tough question. I think that's my personal favorite. Was one of the nasty extensions. And it was for product reorders. And I have no idea why, but when you loaded the order with like 16, 20 products, which is not even the case in B2B projects, but that was a B2B project, and they sometimes had like 100, 120 products in a single order. So we wanted to have reorder module, and for every single product, there were like 4 or 5 simultaneous requests to database. So with 20 products, you got like 100 requests that could be handled just with a single call. So not so much, but still painful. Yes, please. Could you rephrase that? Sorry. Okay, so I didn't cover deep the PHP part, because actually the overhead of this part is very often like third, fourth in the row. However, there are common mistakes that developers make, and this results in inefficient, for example, for each loops that load the data, and the for each is already bad decision for doing, but it's hyperbolized with the Redis, MySQL calls, Elasticsearch calls that it causes. So that's why it's like PHP is a problem, but it's like third, fourth in the row. Okay, we have 3 questions. So,
There we go.
Yes, so now I need to pass the pilot to you.
All right. Well, guys, it doesn't have to be complicated. We talked a little bit about what Platform does with geolocalization, with optimization, and with right sizing and density. So you guys can do this with the click of a button to make those simple changes. Platform also helps you get there. So we have a migration tool that actually helps you lower the emissions by migrating your customers over with little effort on your customer side. We also offer paused environments. So often our environments stay idle. What we do is we're able to pause certain environments so they don't continue to use CPU and RAM, ultimately reducing CO2 emissions. We mentioned Blackfire earlier, but Platform also, so Blackfire was recently acquired or a few years ago by Platform.sh. You can purchase Blackfire as a standalone, but Blackfire optimizes its product and encourages our clients to profile their code to further contribute to reducing our collective carbon emissions. To do this, to use tools like this, like Blackfire and Fastly, both of which are parts of our enterprise offering, to help contribute to your toolkit in reducing emissions.
Okay, so recently I published new website. It's my own website, but it's, you know me from Adobe devblog posts in the past about the architecture. You know me about some Twitter posts, but all of those come and go, and then we lose it from the site, so we forget. So I decided to put all the knowledge, or to start putting on all the knowledge in one place. And what you can expect on my site shortly is just live case studies of optimizations. And also, mid-2024, it's in production already, I'm starting with something that should help agencies, merchants, and single developers to make a pattern, a behavioral pattern of writing and designing the optimized code. So in mid-2024, you should be able to join to enroll the program of video courses for developers and for decision makers like project managers, mentioning the short ways to optimize. Because we have great people in the community, like Ivan Czepurny, like Jakub Winkler, who can help you, like one time help you with optimizing your store. But it's not enough, because it's like, you know, it's like inviting the cleaner at the end of the party. The house will be clean once, but if you don't have a pattern to keep your clean home, then you end up in a messy room again. So my program is to ensure that all the people who are in duty are aware of the performance, but also how it affects the business, how it affects the environment. Thank you.
That's it.